There she is.
Hello.
Hello there. How are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. So excited to welcome you today. This is a great topic. I'm very excited to speak to you about it, for you to share some wonderful insight. And thank you so much for making the time.
Absolutely. I'm ecstatic to be here. It's such a joy. Love
Great.
all things baby feeding. So,
Of course, absolutely. So we'll give it a few minutes for individuals to join.
absolutely.
You had no connection problems last time we were suffering with a lot of technical issues. But in the meantime, while we wait for everyone to kind of come in, I'll just get started and welcome you, and we'll get started. So for everyone, good afternoon. My name is Julia Slanina. I'm the founder and CEO of Treehouse. As we have been doing over the last several weeks, we have started an Ask an Expert IGTV series where we feature amazing, incredible experts like Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh and many others to talk about topics that are very relevant to the demographic that we focus on. And so whether you are an aspiring, an expectant, or new parent, our content today is there to help and guide you with the experts that join us. So today specifically, we are talking about natural remedies, breastfeeding, and chest feeding, and we are featuring Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh. And so Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh, I'm going to give you a little introduction of who she is, unless you want to introduce yourself. It's up to you.
Go for it.
Okay, sounds good. So she practices as an IBCLC, an international board certified lactation consultant, and she is a qualified naturopathic doctor based in southwestern New Brunswick, so Atlantic Canada. Pardon me?
Southeastern.
Southeastern, pardon me. Sorry, Southeastern. Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh provides compassionate, family-centered care through community-based drop-in sessions, group programs, and private consultations, both in person and virtually. So today we're going to be focusing on breastfeeding, chest feeding. So before we jump into that, welcome to you, Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh, and maybe you want to share some words about what it is that you do and how you help those in your community.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, really the focus of the support that I offer is on the whole family. Often when we're talking about infant feeding in particular, so much of the focus is placed on baby, but there's more to the infant feeding relationship, with all of those that are in the family, particularly the feeding parents. And so really a whole family approach to things and making sure folks are accessing good quality information, reliable resources, whether they be here in the local community or online as well. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, again, if you want to learn more about what it is that Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh does, make sure you click that little arrow above my head and you give her a follow, and you follow to Grow with Treehouse as well, as we always provide content like this and just so many topics in our pipeline coming down over the next several weeks in the spring and into the summer. So with that, let's jump right into some of our questions that we're going to talk about today. So our first question is, when will my milk come in?
Yes, this is such a common question, particularly for pregnant parents as they are preparing for labor and birth. It's, one of the things that they hear maybe through the grapevine when it comes to folks who have struggled with their milk supply early on. What's really important to know is that if you are at least 25 weeks into your pregnancy, it's very likely you're already making milk. So the distinction here is between the first milk, the colostrum, which your body prepares and makes while you're pregnant, particularly in that third trimester. And then when we hear the term milk coming in, it usually refers to the mature milk. So the more higher volume milk that the body tends to shift into after that colostrum, after the first few days. So colostrum is there from just over midway through your pregnancy, you know, particularly in that third trimester, and then postpartum, the most common time for that mature milk to come in is somewhere between day 2 and day 5 postpartum. As long as babies are feeding quite often through those early days, they can be sustained on the small amounts of really concentrated colostrum that that a lactating parent is providing. You know, there are some circumstances where they need a little boost
Yeah.
from other places, but you know, for the most part, the colostrum is there and able to sustain them until that mature milk comes in. If for some reason you need some kind of medical interventions during your labor and birth, that can sometimes delay things a little bit. But anytime you have questions, particularly in those early hours or days, reach out to all of those folks who are available to you, whether it is nursing staff or midwifery staff or doctors or lactation consultants, whoever can provide you that support in the immediate postpartum.
Good reminder for all of those parents, especially if it's their first time. What do you do if baby doesn't latch right away?
Yeah, absolutely. So really important here to remember that infant feeding is a learning process. So when we're feeding babies, you know, particularly when we're feeding babies from our bodies, it's a learning process, both for the lactating parent and for the baby. There are natural instincts that will support both of them. Those natural instincts are most easily accessed when both parent and baby are feeling calm. And so that is really, really key for supporting that early latching.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to challenges around early latching, we of course want to make sure that both the milk is being removed from a parent's body in order to increase supply. So the more milk that's removed, the more the supply goes up. Infant feeding, body feeding works through that demand and supply process. So whether it's through a baby latching, whether it's through hand expression or through pumping, that milk will need to be removed from the body. And then if for some reason baby's really struggling with latching, you know, certainly the colostrum can be offered through a syringe with a small cup. You know, oftentimes when we think of feeding babies, if they're not latching, we go straight to bottles, but there's definitely some other options. And any lactation consulting staff that you have available to you should be able to help you with those various options. So 2 parts: when a baby isn't for some reason latching, removing that milk from the parent's body to make sure that the milk supply is maintained or increased, and then making sure the baby is somehow getting the milk, whether it's through syringe or cup or maybe even bottle, depending on what stage things are at and really what's needed.
As some parents and families prepare maybe to welcome their first child, they might be overwhelmed and might be daunted or scared by the pain that might come with body feeding. Is body feeding painful? What's it like?
Such a common question. The most important thing to know is that it's not meant to be painful. Okay, I really want to distinguish here between new sensations, like a newness of sensation, or maybe a little bit of discomfort, and pain. Okay, so it's really, really common in those early stages, in those early, especially hours, days, and weeks, when both parent and baby are doing a lot of learning, there can be a little bit of pain, particularly when a baby first latches. But for those parents who are finding that once baby latches and has been sucking and swallowing a little bit, if that latch gets more comfortable, wonderful. If not, remember, it's not meant to be painful. Okay, if it is painful, unlatch that baby and try again. Reach out for those support people that you have around you. Perhaps there needs to be a little bit of adjustment to baby or parent's positioning. Perhaps there needs a little bit of adjustment to the latch itself. Perhaps baby's struggling a little bit with some oral restrictions, some either tongue or lip tie that's preventing them from really getting a wide open latch, and that is creating some pain. You know, over the years, I've seen so many parents who say, you know, I take a deep breath and I curl my
Oh
toes.
no.
And I say, oh no, you know, that's not something we want you having to move through. So anytime breastfeeding is painful, particularly beyond those first 10 to 20 seconds of latching on in those early stages, it's really important to reach out for support, because, you know, there's two people in that feeding relationship, and both of them are meant to be comfortable. You know, nature wouldn't have designed a way that is stressful and painful for a parent to feed. So really, really important that you connect with those either local or virtual resources that are going to help support you and have a comfortable feeding experience.
So important. How do we know when the baby's full? Because baby can drink and drink and drink, and then we don't know when to remove baby from that latch, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, particularly when babies are latching onto a parent's body, we can't see, right? With a bottle, you can see how much you start with,
Right.
how much you finish with. And, you know, I even met a parent and baby this morning, and the parent said, you know, my mother-in-law is visiting, and, you know, she's really saying, we've got to know, we have to, you know, we have to feed the baby a bottle so we can see how much they're getting. So lots of ways that we can see getting enough when they're feeding directly from a parent's body. Okay. The first is watching for the baby's suck and swallow rhythm. So particularly after that mature milk comes in and there's a bit more volume for swallowing, parents will notice when a baby first latches that they do kind of a lighter, quick suck. And that suck is meant to stimulate the letdown or the release of milk from the body. And once that letdown comes and the milk is flowing, they're going to notice kind of a more rhythmic suck and swallow. And as we're noticing that suck and swallow, guess what they're swallowing? Milk. Right? We may not know the exact volume of it, but if we can see, sometimes we can even hear a baby actively swallowing. It sounds a little bit like a light sound. And you're going to notice the pause in their chin. If you really want a visual for it, any parent can grab a glass of water and stand in front of a mirror and watch how their chin moves when they swallow. And you kind of see that movement and that pausing action that you'll see when your baby is latched. Okay. And so as long as that baby is actively drinking, getting lots of good swallows, we know that there's milk going in. You're going to notice as the flow of milk slows that they're going to shift a little bit, maybe to a suck, 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 swallow. A little bit more sucking to swallowing, but they're still getting some milk. Sometimes I have my crochet breast here. Sometimes parents find it helpful when a baby is latched and that suck swallow rhythm is slowing down, that they give a little bit of massage or compressions to their breast tissue to help move the milk out a little bit more efficiently. But as long as baby's actively drinking, they can stay there at the breast. And when things really slow down, particularly with those breast compressions, a parent can unlatch the baby and latch them on the other side. So how do we know they're full? They're getting lots of good swallows. Oftentimes with newborns, when they start a feed, their fists are quite tight. And as their bellies fill, their hands relax and their bodies relax. And so that's another thing that parents can watch out for. Sometimes babies will fall asleep at the breast, but this isn't always telling us that they're full. Okay. Sometimes, depending on when they were born relative to their due date and, oh gosh, a whole bunch of other factors. They fall asleep at the breast before their bellies are full. So particularly for newborns, watch those hands because they will relax. You may end up with a baby asleep at the breast who's got some really tight hands. And that might be a sign that they need to maybe be unlatched and burped and maybe changed, wake them up a little bit. but they'll probably want to come back to feed a little bit more until their bellies are really full. So we can't tell exactly how much is going in, but we know they're full by that active swallowing, that active drinking, by their bodies relaxing, sometimes when they sleep. And we're also going to know they're getting enough milk if their output, so peas and stools, are relatively plentiful. So for a newborn, after mom's milk supply has come in, so after that day 5 or 6 mark, we're looking for at least 3 dirty diapers a day and 6 or more heavy wet diapers a day. And they can only produce all of that pee and poop if
they're drinking milk.
Exactly. And then your care provider is also going to very likely weigh them whenever you are seeing someone. But lots of ways that we can tell babies are filling their bellies when they're at home with us.
Mm-hmm. Are there any foods that the parent should avoid when they're body feeding?
Such a great question. So whether you're feeding baby directly from your body or whether you're pumping and offering milk through bottle or other way, it's much more rare than a lot of parents hear that they need to avoid certain foods. My general rule for parents when they're body feeding or when they're human milk feeding is that to only avoid those things that they know bother their own bodies. So if you have a food intolerance or a food allergy, keep avoiding those foods. But you know, there's lots of myths out there when it comes to the connection between foods and gassiness in babies and you know, all those kinds of things. And you know, they might influence things a little bit, but it's more likely that things like positioning and latch and you know, maybe some structural challenges or restrictions are going to impact you know, digestive issues and that kind of thing for the baby. So eat what feels good, you know, as nutrient dense as possible. You know, parents who are making milk need about 500 extra calories per day compared.
That's a very good reminder.
Compared to when they're not making milk. So that's an important factor as well. So nutrient dense, you're probably going to feel more hungry than usual. Make sure you're getting lots and lots of fluids. But when it comes to avoiding certain foods, just avoid the foods that make you feel unwell. And then if something is up, get some guidance from your care team, perhaps a naturopathic doctor or a lactation consultant or nutritionist to help, you know, guide you through some of those more specific nutritional recommendations if they're needed.
Thank you. What if I use a breast pump? How long can I store my breast milk for?
Yeah. So to make it easiest for parents, I ask them to remember the number 4. So you're going to see slightly different recommendations from different places if you were to type this question into and ask Dr. Google. So remember the rule of 4s. So freshly expressed milk can be out on the counter for 4 hours. Okay. Freshly expressed and put directly in the fridge, 4 days. Freshly expressed and then frozen, 4 months. That's a freezer on top, you know, associated with a fridge. It used to be always on top of a fridge. Now it's on top.
Now it's on the bottom.
But if you're freezing human milk in a freezer that's attached to a fridge, make sure that you tuck it as far back as possible, whenever possible. The closer it is to the front, the door is opening quite regularly. So the closer to the back it is, the better. But in general, 4 hours on the counter, 4 days in the fridge, 4 months in the freezer associated with the fridge. It can be 6 to 12 months in a deep freeze, but those are that rule of 4s is kind of a nice, quick, and easy way to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great one to remember. When can I introduce a bottle? So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about bottle and formula. We had a question come in from one of the viewers about formula, so we'll get to that in just a second. But when can I introduce a bottle so others can feed my pumped milk to the baby?
Yeah. whew, I
Get
think that
some reprieve.
it's, it's a big question.
That's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, a lot of times the concern with introducing a bottle that comes up, parents will hear a lot about nipple confusion, and
Mhm.
you'll see the good old air quotes that I put on that one.
Yeah.
Babies are not confused about nipples. Let me tell you this. They know when it's a parent nipple versus a bottle nipple. What can become a little bit challenging for a baby is the difference in flow. So the flow of milk from a parent's body, they have to work a little bit with, that little bit of flutter suck to get going with the letdown. And then after the letdown, it'll slow a little bit. And some babies will hang out and suck a little bit more, and then another letdown will come. So it's not a really consistent, quick flow
Right.
of the breast. Whereas with a bottle, particularly if a baby is in kind of a more reclined position, a bottle is going to very possibly drip milk even when they're not sucking. And so in order to protect their airway, they're going to swallow that milk no matter what.
Yeah.
So sometimes, particularly in those early days and weeks, if a bottle is introduced, babies can develop what's called a flow preference. So they prefer the flow from the bottle because it's quick and easy. Okay.
Yeah.
When it comes to when can I, with that question, it suggests that feeding from parent's body is going relatively well.
Okay.
And that an introduction of a bottle hasn't been needed for supplementation of some sort. So in that case, most lactation consultants will recommend waiting, if you can, until the 6-ish week mark postpartum, until feeding from your body is well established, so that baby's got lots of practice with latching and really sort of laying down those neural pathways when it comes to how milk flows from a parent's body. And once that connection is established, there's a little bit more flexibility when it comes to sort of a back and forth from bottle to body. When it comes to, so someone else can feed baby expressed milk, remind all those, because sometimes moms feel a little bit pressured, especially in the early days and weeks, because, everybody wants to hold a baby and feed a baby and, snuggle a baby and those kinds of things. So I always encourage parents to remind extended family members and friends at that stage that, we're going to focus on feeding on body to really establish that latch and feeding. And they can connect with and snuggle with the baby in other ways. Change diaper, snuggle skin to skin. When it comes to a non-lactating parent, them snuggling skin to skin is going to help rewire their brain for parenting as well. So lots of opportunity to have that connection with a new little one that isn't necessarily feeding. I hope that was helpful. And if the person who answered the question has any follow-up, just pop it.
Absolutely.
They'll let me know.
So let's just quickly talk a little bit about formula, and then we'll come back to breastfeeding and milk supply. But with respect to formula, a viewer asks, how early can I start formula feeding if breastfeeding is just too uncomfortable? Maybe it's uncomfortable, maybe you don't have that much supply and you have a hungry baby. When should you start formula?
Yeah, really key here to make sure you have some support from your care team in knowing, when that's really needed and the amounts that are needed. Sometimes when families are really struggling with body feeding, with even just expressed human milk feeding, so a lactating parent is pumping and they have maybe not quite enough milk to keep baby on target with their growth, it's usually sort of that growth piece where the need comes up. So that's best guided by your care team when it comes to the amount of formula that baby's going to need in order to complement the amount of human milk that they're taking as well. If it is sort of a consideration to introduce formula because body feeding, breastfeeding, chest feeding is too painful, and you don't have the resources perhaps to navigate that, or sometimes we don't know the resources that are out there, and then we get to a point where it's just too much. We're exhausted. Our mental health is suffering, and it really does feel like there's that need to immediately make the switch over to formula. Again, double check with your care team when it comes to the amounts. Most babies, if you're kind of shifting directly to formula feeding, most babies are going to need somewhere between 4 and 6 ounces of milk. So breast milk, parent's milk, and formula milk, a combination of the two or one or the other, with each feed. And so that will kind of give you a general idea. If you're deciding, I've reached my limit, I really need to stop, I don't have the support I need, to keep feeding from my body, I just really need to switch to formula. Yes, that's okay.
Well, that's fine. And to be clear, you can start formula the day the child is born. It's not like you have to wait 6 months or 12 months or something like that. So it's like you said, it's dependent on that growth as well, and the output, and so many other factors we discussed.
Yeah, and really a family overall feeding intention. Okay, so if a family is really intent on wanting that baby to have human milk, whether it's directly from a parent's body or whether it's expressed milk, whether you're preparing for this process during pregnancy and sort of gathering those, what I call human resources, those resources in your community, both locally and online, that can support you in reaching those feeding intentions. But for some families, they start with the intention of, I'm going to feed as much human milk as possible and maybe start integrating some formula at the start. So know that all types of intentions are absolutely a-okay. And, any human milk that a baby can get is going to be supportive for their overall health. If your intention is to exclusively human milk feed, the earlier the introduction of formula, sometimes the more challenge there can be for a parent's milk supply. But there isn't any kind of guideline, like you say, Julia, around, when we're allowed to, or when it's okay to.
When it's okay.
It really depends on your feeding intentions and your needs as a family, and for baby's growth and development.
And I think, what you just commented on it really speaks to a question that a viewer just came and posted. They ask, I'm interested in combo feeding for my second. Is this something that's supported by lactation consultants? And your answer basically is yes, is that you can start as early as you want, and whatever works for your family as well.
Absolutely. And it's really important for families. You're going to encounter healthcare providers of all types. So lactation consultants of all types, nurses of all types, midwives of all types, doctors of all types, and everybody comes with a slightly different background and experience. And so what I really encourage you to do, if there's something specific about your feeding intentions, is to express that to your care team and ask, if there are some lactation consultants in your local area that you're interested in possibly working with, if the need arises, ask them. Send them an email, give them a call, send them a text, however you can reach them, and ask, this is what my intention is. Are you comfortable in supporting that intention? Because, unfortunately, I've heard from a lot of families that they felt really pressured to exclusively breastfeed or exclusively milk feed. And yes, there are lots of beautiful benefits. And depending on a parent's previous experience with lactating and feeding a baby, depending on their birth experience, their mental health, there are so many layers and so many factors that go into that whole picture. So like I say, if you have some specifics about your breastfeeding intentions and you want to make sure that you're supported in them, really important for you to ask those that you might be reaching out to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if anyone who's watching today has additional questions or wants to get in touch with Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh, feel free to, again, click that little arrow above my head, follow her, ask her questions. You can reach out to us and we'll connect you with her as well. Just the conversation doesn't end when we're done our IGTV. It continues. Maybe you can tell us, how long should I breastfeed for? This is also a touchy question because some people love to offer their opinion about what is the best time and length, and it doesn't work that way. Your body's not a mechanism that can just work.
Exactly. And, sometimes I feel like some of the more, where some of the suspicions come up, I feel like, is almost whenever I hear a should. So when should I, or should I?
Yes.
Because, oh man, there's so much packed into a should. But let's wind that back a little bit. When it comes to major health organizations, Health Canada, the World Health Organization, their overall recommendation for families is exclusive human milk feeding until the age of 6 months, and then with the introduction of complementary foods, and continue human milk feeding to the age of 2 and beyond when possible. Now, that is the recommendation from those major health organizations. And let's go back to those parent and family feeding intentions. So it can feel really supportive to understand how human milk feeding will be supportive for your baby, supportive for the lactating parent. There's loads of health benefits that we don't often hear about there either. And also looking at life overall and health concerns overall. And so when it comes to how long should I breastfeed, sometimes, sometimes it's coming up around times where, we're hearing from maybe older family members that things were a little bit different when they were raising babies, that should that baby be, feeding from your body still? Like, are they still? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Right. So there isn't, if you're in that kind of a situation where you've got someone saying they're still feeding, you can cite those overall health.
That's what the recommendation says. Yeah.
This is what we're aiming for. It's kind of a quick answer, but always refer back to your own feeding intentions and your family feeding intentions when it comes to, how long you offer human milk for. Yeah.
Is it common to have uneven milk supply? Maybe you have all this milk that comes in right after you've given birth and it's fantastic, and then maybe by 3 months you're struggling a little bit, and then you don't know if you should continue, but then suddenly you have milk supply again. So is this normal?
Yeah, and so when you say uneven milk supply, I'm going to kind of take it from a couple of angles here. Yes. The first is it's super common for each side of a parent's, each breast or each side of a parent's chest to make slightly different amounts. So, parents will often say that their child has a favorite side. And often that's because the milk is flowing more easily, more plentifully from that side. Sometimes it's because the infant is more comfortable in the position that they're in on that side. So if you're finding that there's a favorite side, oftentimes I'm recommending families explore folks who offer body work in their local area. So osteopathic practitioners, maybe chiropractors with some specialty training and experience, just to see if there's maybe a little bit of discomfort that's causing that favoritism for the sides. And when babies have a favorite side, or even when moms are more comfortable feeding from one side or the other, sometimes one will make a little bit more than the other. When it comes to shifts in supply throughout your feeding experience, that is also common and can be absolutely normal. So for a lot of parents, we hear, unfortunately, of those quite often who struggle early on with bringing their supply up and getting it to a level where they need it to to have enough to offer their baby to maintain their growth and development. What we don't hear is all of those parents who postpartum are making plentiful amounts of milk. And that is actually more often the case. And for a lot of parents, what will happen is their bodies are saying, let's go, let's make all the milk and we're going to see what happens. And so remember, milk making works on a demand and supply process. So if you're one of those parents who has lots of fullness and lots of engorgement early on, lots of milk, that should gradually shift after about the 6-week mark. Your body will get the hang of how much this baby needs. The body might be saying, hey, am I feeding twins? Am I feeding triplets? How much milk do I actually need?
Yeah.
And so it'll be able to gauge that demand and supply after about the 6 to 8 week mark. If you're really struggling in those early days and weeks with some pretty persistent engorgement, so lots of fullness and some difficulty moving that milk out of your body, make sure that you reach out for support, and so that it's not a consistent challenge, because that can contribute to things like mastitis and blocked ducts. Which be uncomfortable to work through as well. So oftentimes quite plentiful at the start. Things will kind of settle out at that 6 or so week mark. And then whenever babies have growth spurts, so the most common growth spurts we want to kind of keep an eye out for are about 7 to 10 days, about 3 weeks, 6 weeks, and 3 months postpartum. And in those time periods, those growth spurts usually last anywhere from 2 to 7 days. You're going to notice the baby's going to want to feed quite a bit more often, or maybe even longer at each feed. And that's because they're going through a rapid period of growth. And so you're going to notice the more a baby feeds, then you might start to notice a bit more fullness in your breast and that milk supply come up. And then once that growth spurt settles down, it'll level off again. Settle down and level off again. If you're noticing around the 3 or 4 month mark that you're starting to have some questions of, supply, and maybe baby's growth isn't going as efficiently as possible, maybe a care provider has mentioned that to you, there are some sort of more specific reasons around why that might happen and some different strategies to use. So definitely reach out to a lactation consultant in your area to help with that. But those gradual shifts and changes, that demand and supply is going to shift and change from time to time, just depending on baby's needs.
Of course. Such helpful information. I think this is just so great. One of our last questions for today is cabbage, engorgement. Some individuals may think this is an old wives, not an old wives tale, but just, tips from many years ago. But does engorgement and using cabbage give anyone any relief? Is this a real thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes is the short answer. But the longer answer, something we have to kind of be aware of. So the most common times for engorgement is when a parent is first beginning to body feed. So like I say, postpartum, that mature milk comes in and the body's saying, let's just make all the milk possible. And then the other common place where it's happening is when parents are beginning to actively wean babies. And so we had mentioned earlier that situation, if there's a lot of pain and you've, reached your place and you're like, nope, we really have to just switch over to formula to keep feeding this baby. That's a common time when engorgement is going to show up as well. And so if you're going to do that, just a little word here, make sure you have support in that process, because we don't want, after all that struggle you've already had, engorgement and mastitis to be part of that journey as well. So make sure you get support. But when it comes to the cabbage leaves and engorgement, it's an old school remedy. It's been around for years and years, and yes, it does work. The sort of caveat to it is that it can decrease supply some. So it's not something that we really want to use consistently for long periods of time. But with the cabbage leaves, I mean, nature's wonderful in these things. Cabbage leaves are, you know, relatively round, they're breast chest shaped, that, you know, when they come out from the fridge cold, that we can cut, you know, we can take a leaf off and cut the sort of harder bone. Is that what it's called?
Like a vein? Is that like the vein
Harder,
almost? Like
yeah,
the vein?
the harder bit of it, because we
Yeah.
don't use that up against you know, a really
No.
full chest of milk. So
Yeah.
cut that out and then just tuck it inside a, you know, a bra or even a tank top to hold it close up to your chest, and leave it there until the cabbage wilts, warms and wilts, and then be removed. So, you know, definitely that's something that can be used as a strategy. The other thing that can be used is cold compresses. So, or a combination of heat and cold when that engorgement's there. And, you know, where with the cabbage leaf, there is a little bit of concern that it could potentially decrease supply. If it's in the case of weaning, that's okay. That's what we're headed for anyway. But in those early days, that's sometimes a concern for families. And so with engorgement, as an alternative to those cabbage leaves, we can use warm compresses for 5 or 10 minutes immediately before a feed or a pumping session, and then cold compresses between feeds to help to ease that fullness and inflammation that sometimes comes with the engorgement.
Thank you. And thank you for this amazing session that we've had over the last kind of 40 minutes or so. We've gone through so many different aspects of body feeding, chest feeding, breastfeeding, and we've answered many, many questions. And I'm sure we could talk about this topic for a lot longer. I think it's just so important to have experts like yourself. So we thank you so much, Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh, for taking the time today to educate our community, to educate everyone about the services and the care that you provide. And we encourage everyone to stay connected with us and with Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh. If you have any additional questions that maybe you think of in the next half an hour or in the middle of the night, reach out to us or reach out to Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh, and we will absolutely help you get connected with her. Any last words that you'd like to say before we wrap up for this afternoon?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the biggest message, or the most foundational message that I can give any family, no matter where they are in this process, is twofold. No, threefold. Check in with your intentions, your feeding intentions, you know, individual family feeding intentions. Have those human resources around you, whether it's family members, supportive friends, supportive neighbors, coworkers, healthcare providers. Make sure you cultivate that community of human resources around you. You know, we're not made to parent, to feed babies in isolation. We're meant to do it in community. And at this stage in our culture, what we're being asked to do is work away at cultivating those communities ourselves so that we're feeling well supported. And the third thing is making sure you have ways to support and care for yourself. Your body is going to make milk best. You're going to be able to access your parenting instincts and resources best when you're feeling calm and relaxed as possible. So having some different strategies to play with and explore and use on a day-to-day basis can be just really supportive, not only for your feeding journey, but your overall parenting journey.
Thank you so much. Such important reminders, such educational content, helpful content, even for me. And I don't breastfeed anymore. I just learned so much over the last 40 minutes. So thank you again. And thank you for everyone who watched today. We look forward to seeing you on our next Ask an Expert. And again, it's been a pleasure, Dr. Sarah Hardy-Walsh. We'll talk to you very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julie.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.